At Newton Division, things kick off fast. Brian and Mike are in hot pursuit of a truck, and the whole chase is caught on camera. When they corner the suspects, the guys in the truck start shooting, smashing their windshield. Instead of backing off, Brian and Mike push forward, return fire, and take both suspects down before cuffing them as backup sirens wail in the distance. Later, back in the locker room, Brian's still got his camera rolling. This is where the good guys get ready to take on the bad guys. He jokes, pulling a shirtless Mike into the frame. Mike shrugs him off, but Brian keeps narrating like it's a documentary. We're with Newton Division, one of the roughest areas in the LAPD. Mike grins, Newton man, lucky number 13. Brian shows off their gear, a knife, extra mags, until Officer Van barges in, unimpressed. He warns them about filming inside the station, threatening to report it, and that's when Brian finally shuts the camera. From then on, they stick to body cams, pointing them at each other. At the next briefing, the captain levels with them. You've been cleared for last month's shooting, he says. It was ruled justified. He tells them he's been where they are. Pulling the trigger is still taking a life. If you do right, I'll back you. But if you screw up, I'll personally throw you under the bus. The sergeant takes over and warns them they need to start writing more tickets or risk getting split up. Then he reassigns them to Area 13 instead of their usual post at Area 9. Out in the parking lot, Orasco calls out, you know, something goes sideways, they can subpoena all that footage, right? Brian just smirks, 2 words, erase button. When Orasco asks why he's recording everything, Brian says it's for his pre-law class. After getting an earful about how reckless that sounds, Brian and Mike hop into their new patrol car with the big 13 painted on the side. Once they hit the streets again, camera rolling, Mike stretches in the seat and says, man, it feels good to be back. He jokes about his time off, stuck at home with his wife and her annoying brother who kept swimming in his pool all day. Before long, the radio crackles with a call. Disturbance at 9742 Maple Street. First call of the day, Brian says. Let's make it count. They arrive at the scene. Some guy's gone off the rails over mail. Apparently, he got into it with his mailman and now he's shouting at everyone, clearly drunk or high. When Brian and Mike try to calm him, he starts hurling racial slurs at Mike, challenging him to fight. If you beat me fair, I'll cuff myself, the guy says, ripping off his shirt. Mike tosses his belt aside, ready to throw down. The fight turns into pure chaos. Mike slams the guy into a dresser while Brian films and gives commentary like it's a sports match. The suspect, Trey, gets a few kicks in before Mike bounces back, lands a solid punch, and drives him into the wall, hitting him hard until Trey collapses. Give me those cuffs, Mike says, and Brian tosses them like he's handing over a trophy. That night, a local gang called the Locos is gearing up. Masks, guns, the whole thing. Across town, Trey's with his crew, explaining what went down. We went toe-to-toe. He took off his badge and gun, and we just fought. He beat me, yeah, but it was real. He didn't press charges either. For that, Trey actually respects Mike. Win or lose, as long as you stand your ground. That's real, he tells them. Still, tension brews. Some say it doesn't change how Mexican cops treat black folks. Trey admits his old neighborhood's been changing, taken over by Latino gangs. Not long after, the Locos roll through the block in a drive-by, spraying bullets and claiming the area. One of Trey's people gets hit. CK goes down bleeding, and revenge talk starts immediately. The next day, Brian and Mike find a burnout car, the suspected drive-by vehicle. Code 37, Brian says, checking out the scene. The car's torched, but they find 2 types of shell casings, though detectives said there were 3. Looks like rival gangs are battling over drug turf. When homicide detectives arrive, they're annoyed to find Brian still filming. Put the camera down and tape the perimeter, 1 snaps. Brian and Mike do as told, stretching out yellow tape while detectives dig through evidence for hours. Eventually, Officer Van shows up to relieve them, sending them back on patrol. Van's partner, Orasco, gives them a hard time for acting like heroes. You 2 think you're making a difference, he says, until the department hangs you out to dry. Brian and Mike just laugh it off, still cracking jokes as they drive away. Back in the car, Mike tries to set Brian up with a girl, but before they can talk more, another call comes through, a missing child case. They race to the address where a frantic mom insists her kids are gone. Mike detains a man lounging on the couch who resists arrest, while Brian searches the house. He finally yells, I found them. The toddlers are taped up inside a cluttered closet. The sight shakes both officers to the core. Later that night, Brian can't shake it off. He hits the gym hard, pushing until he's drenched in sweat. On patrol again, He tells Mike about a girl he's been seeing and how he feels a real connection this time. Mike teases him, not buying it, and they drift into talk about marriage. Mike's been with Gabby since high school, 8 years now, and though Brian doubts the chemistry, Mike says she's the best thing that ever happened to him. Brian sighs, I just want someone smart, someone I can actually talk to. Mike laughs, you want someone like my wife? Touch her and I'll kill you. Brian laughs it off but still doesn't say the girl's name. Mike presses him, grabs his phone, and figures it out anyway. He invites Brian to bring her to his sister's quinceanera. Later, they respond to a noise complaint at a gang house party. Loud music, smoke, and shady looks all around. Brian spots Big Evil, one of the local gang leaders. Why they call you that? Brian asks. Because my evil's big, the guy answers with a smirk. The air gets tense before Brian breaks it with a warning, keep it down. At the quinceanera, Brian shows up with Janet as his date. Everyone's having a good time. Gabby's pregnant and chatting with Janet while the guys share jokes. Later that night, back at Brian's apartment, he and Janet grow close. In the morning, she wanders around, filming herself with his camera. I did go through your wallet, she says on the video, smiling shyly. I'm just curious. She finds a photo of his mom and says softly, gotta love a guy who keeps his mom's picture. She even finds a list of women's names but laughs it off, saying that's all in the past now. She kisses the camera before curling back into bed beside him. Back on duty, Brian and Mike are staking out a street corner known for gang traffic when their sergeant drives up. He tells Brian that Van's complaining again about all his filming. I got a note that I warned you, he says, shaking his head. Brian insists it's just for his documentary, and Mike jokes that Van's just bitter. The sergeant lets it slide. Soon, they spot a truck. Big Evil's mom comes out to pick up a suspicious package. Brian runs the plates. They come back clean. Still, Mike notices a CD hanging from the mirror. Obstructed view. Good enough reason, he says. They pull the truck over. When Mike approaches, the driver suddenly pulls a gun. Mike reacts instantly, redirects the shot, and wrestles the weapon away. Brian's already on the other side, gun drawn, covering him as they take the guy down. Backup arrives, sirens blaring. Orozco and his partner join in the search. Inside the truck, they find a pot that's supposed to hold soup. Instead, it's full of cash. There are also some fancy guns hidden under the seat. Later, back at the station, the two of them are drowning in paperwork while the captain looks on. The sergeant pats them on the shoulder and says, nice work, boys. Keep it up. Mike noticed how Brian tensed up whenever the captain was nearby. It was almost funny how obvious it was. Brian didn't even bother hiding it. Trying to lighten the mood, he casually mentioned that he had another date planned with Janet and headed off, flashing that smug grin he always wore when he was proud of himself. He spent the whole day with Janet, totally smitten, telling her straight up, you're the best. Then, the next night, they were back on patrol, both dead tired and running mostly on caffeine and adrenaline. Brian was talking about grabbing another coffee, but Mike refused, saying he'd already had enough energy drinks to make his heart explode. As they drove, Brian spotted flames in the distance and immediately called it in. Mike floored it toward the scene. When they arrived, a terrified woman ran from a burning house, screaming that her kids were still trapped inside. Without a second thought, the two officers charged in. They managed to pull 2 kids to safety, but the woman sobbed that her youngest, a 2-year-old girl, was still upstairs. Before Brian could stop him, Mike ran straight back into the inferno. Brian followed right after. The smoke was thick, the heat unbearable, but they crawled through the flames until they found the toddler. Getting out was like running through hell. Every breath burned, and every step felt like forever, but somehow they made it out alive with the child in their arms. Paramedics rushed to help them, but both cops waved them off, more worried about each other than their own burns. Mike grabbed Brian, steadying him as he coughed and gasped for air, assuring him he'd be fine. A few weeks later, both of them stood in front of the whole department, being awarded the Medal of Valor for saving those kids. The applause was thunderous, but neither felt like a hero. Later, sitting at a convenience store, Brian looked at Mike and asked, you feel like a hero? Mike smirked and said nope. Yeah, Brian sighed. Me neither. They joked about it, but deep down, both knew the fire had changed something. Mike told him Gabby was furious after that night. She'd cried, terrified she might lose him before he ever got to meet their baby. Brian said Janet had felt the same, and he admitted he only ran back inside because Mike did first. Mike laughed, but could tell Brian's mind was elsewhere. Eventually, Brian confessed what was bugging him. The driver they'd arrested earlier, the one with the fancy guns. He'd been digging around and was convinced there was a bigger operation going on. Mike reminded him he wasn't a detective, but Brian argued that the guys who were supposed to handle it weren't doing their job. "I said you're not a detective," Mike repeated. Brian shot back, "I want to be one." Mike rolled his eyes but eventually gave in. They decided to check things out themselves. When they reached the house, Brian called for backup while Mike banged on the front door. Inside, they found a bizarre shrine, and behind a curtain, a room full of terrified people, trafficking victims. Before they could process what was happening, federal agents swarmed in, shouting questions. One of them was furious, yelling that the patrol officers had just blown an ongoing operation. Brian tried to explain, but the feds brushed him off. One finally pulled him aside and said, "You've just walked into cartel business. Be careful. These guys play by different rules." The message was clear. They'd stepped into something dangerous, and it was time to back off. Back in their patrol car, the partners argued. Mike was fuming, saying they had no business being there without a call. Brian snapped that he didn't think it would get so serious. The rest of the drive was silent. Not long after, Gabby gave birth to their baby boy. When Brian and Janet came to visit, Brian whispered, "Did you name him Brian?" Mike laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, he's a junior." Back on night patrol, the two chatted about love and marriage. Mike gave him brotherly advice, telling him to be sure before proposing to Janet, because marriage was a forever kind of deal. Then came a distress call from a rookie cop, her voice shaky, barely coherent. When they arrived, the scene was pure chaos. Officer Van was down, a knife lodged in his eye, his partner being beaten mercilessly by a man in an alley. Brian shouted at the suspect to stand down or get shot. The man slowly raised his hands, pretending to surrender, and Brian barked more orders while Mike cuffed him. The guy was seconds away from killing that cop. Later, Sarge broke the news that Van and Sook were done. They wouldn't be coming back to the division. Things were falling apart, but Brian and Mike still had to keep going. Weeks later, at Brian and Janet's wedding, Mike stood up as best man. "Janet," he said, "you've got guts marrying a cop. You gotta be tough for that. Look around. Every cop's wife here knows what I mean." He grinned, then turned to Brian. "You better take care of her, man. You two are family now." The crowd laughed and cheered as he raised his glass for a toast. Everyone gave advice, Sarge to the young officers, Gabby whispering to Janet about keeping her marriage exciting, and finally Mike, who told Brian, "If anything happens to you, I'll take care of your kids and her. You're my brother, man." Brian could only smile back. A few days later, during a routine morning shift, they were reviewing reports. Most were dull until one stood out, a wellness check on an elderly woman. When no one answered the door, Brian narrated to his camera while Mike checked the backyard. After confirming they had permission, Mike kicked down the locked door, and a strong stench hit them immediately. Inside, they found a body wrapped in plastic and more horrifying things, a kettle filled with drugs, and a room full of dismembered remains. It was clearly cartel work. Soon, news channels called it the biggest drug bust of the year, but the victory was short-lived. A cartel contact ordered hits on both Brian and Mike for interfering. They later ran into Trey, who warned them straight up. "Word on the street is, y'all been greenlit. Cartel wants you gone." Brian shrugged it off, saying every cop had a target on his back, but Trey shook his head, saying this was different. Someone high up had given the order. Meanwhile, gang members were already planning the hit. Big Evil, Law, and their crew argued about timing. Law wanted to plan carefully, but Big Evil just wanted blood. He finally agreed to hold off until things cooled down. During another shift, Brian told Mike that Janet was pregnant. Mike was thrilled, congratulating his partner like a proud big brother. That same night, a speeding car drew their attention. They gave chase, and when the driver slammed the brakes, they crashed into him. The suspect bolted into an apartment complex, and the officers followed. As soon as they stepped inside, automatic gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through walls and ceilings, forcing them to sprint for cover. In one room, they found a woman shielding her baby, terrified. Brian's radio had been hit, and his phone had no signal. Mike used the woman's phone to call for help, but her screams alerted the attackers. Gunfire ripped through the air as they ducked behind walls, returning fire when they could. "We're shooting our way out, bro," Brian shouted. They coordinated a plan, emptying their clips before moving. They managed to take out one gunman, then another hiding in a car outside. They kept pushing forward when headlights appeared. Mike hoped it was backup, but it wasn't. Another burst of bullets flew, and Brian went down. Mike took out the shooter, but saw his partner bleeding badly. "It's bad," Mike said, pressing on the wound. "But I've seen worse, man. You're gonna make it." He tried to keep Brian conscious, yelling for help that never came. Then, from behind, a voice snarled, "Checkmate, Puto." Gunfire followed, and Mike was hit multiple times. Backup finally arrived, taking out the gang members, but it was too late. At the funeral, the entire department stood in silence. Brian had survived, but Mike hadn't. Dressed in black, Brian stepped up to the podium, struggling to speak. "He was my brother," he managed before breaking down. The film closes with a flashback. Mike joking about his first night with Gabby, both laughing before the call that changed everything came through the radio. And that's how their story ends. Two partners who lived and died as brothers, bound by the badge and the streets they swore to protect.